Cal Renner dropped his saddlebags onto the plank floor of the Duskwater Hotel with a thud that nobody in the crowded dining room bothered to look up for. He pulled off his hat, ran a hand through his road-dusty hair, and found himself a chair at the nearest empty table. The chair across from him held someone's forgotten coat. He didn't move it. He was too tired to care about company. The dining room of the Duskwater was the kind of place that existed in every frontier town between Missouri and the Pacific. Loud, warm, and smelling of wood smoke and grease. A long bar ran the length of the far wall. Round tables crowded the center of the room, every one of them occupied by men who were either celebrating something or trying to forget it. A fiddle player in the corner was sawing through a jig that nobody was listening to. A boy of about 14 came to take his order. Cal asked if there was anything besides the pot roast. The boy said no. Cal said that was fine and ordered a plate of it and a coffee if they had any left. The coffee arrived first, bitter and strong and exactly right. Cal wrapped both hands around the mug and let the warmth seep into his palms. He had been riding for 11 days. He was 34 years old and he felt considerably older. The surveying contract out of Denver had taken him through 3 mountain passes and 2 early-season blizzards, and now he was here in Duskwater, Nevada, for the winter, waiting on a land grant commission that wouldn't convene until March. He had no particular feeling about Duskwater one way or the other. It was a place to be still for a while. That was enough. The pot roast arrived, and it was adequate. Soft carrots, gray potatoes, beef that had been cooking since morning. He ate it mechanically, his eyes drifting around the room the way a man's eyes do when his mind is somewhere else entirely. That was when he noticed the bread. It was sitting in a small cloth-covered basket on the side of his plate. He hadn't paid it any mind when the boy set it down. He reached for a piece now, more out of habit than hunger, and tore it. The inside was golden and soft, with a fine, even crumb that caught the lamplight. He put a piece in his mouth. He stopped chewing. It was not ordinary bread. It was the kind of bread that had no business being in a place like this, light as a whisper, with a delicate sweetness underneath, and beneath that, a faint herbal note he couldn't immediately name. Rosemary, maybe. Something wild. It tasted like someone had thought about it. Like someone had cared, specifically and deliberately, about every person who would eat it, even the ones passing through, even the ones nobody would remember. He looked down at the basket. There were 3 more pieces. He ate every one of them. Then he pushed back his plate, picked up his coffee mug, and raised his voice just enough to carry over the fiddle and the noise. Not loud, not angry, just certain. Who baked this bread? The room didn't exactly go quiet, but the tables nearest to him did. A few heads turned. A heavy-set man behind the bar, the owner, by the look of him, glanced up with the expression of a man bracing for trouble. And then the kitchen door swung open. She came through it carrying a pot that was clearly too heavy for her, both arms wrapped around it, her chin tucked to hold it steady. She set it on the sideboard, just inside the dining room, and straightened up, and that was when she heard the question still hanging in the air, and her eyes found him. She was young, perhaps 22, 23, dark-haired, with the kind of face that was easy to look at and easier to overlook because there was nothing theatrical about her beauty. It was quiet and precise, like the bread. Her eyes were a steady, serious brown, and right now they were fixed on him with the watchfulness of someone who had learned to read the mood of a room before committing to her next step. Her name was Nora Voss. She had been the cook at the Duskwater Hotel for nearly 2 years. She had come to Nevada from Ohio after her father's death left the family farm to a brother who had no use for a sister with opinions, and she had arrived in Duskwater with $31, a suitcase, and a small tin box of dried herbs she had grown herself. Mr. Aldrich, the hotel's owner, had hired her because his previous cook had left without notice, and the breakfast rush was in 4 hours. He had not raised her wages since. She was, in the way of all indispensable things, completely taken for granted. The traveling salesman ate her food and complained about the portions. The miners thanked the hotel, never her. When a guest left a compliment with Mr. Aldrich, Aldrich accepted it pleasantly and said nothing to Nora. She had long since stopped expecting otherwise. She cooked because she was good at it, and because it gave her something the rest of her life in Duskwater did not. A small private kingdom where she made every decision and every outcome was her own. She stood in the doorway now, her hands still resting on the frame, and looked at the tall, road-worn man who had asked about her bread. She waited for the complaint. Cal looked back at her. He had not expected youth. He had not expected that direct, self-possessed gaze. He had expected he didn't know exactly what he'd expected. Someone older, probably. Someone who matched the roughness of the room. "That is the finest bread I have eaten in 2 years of living out of a saddlebag," he said. His voice was even and quiet. "I wanted whoever made it to know that." A beat of silence. Nora held his gaze for a moment longer than was entirely comfortable, not hostile. Assessing. Then she gave a single, precise nod, not grateful, not warm, just acknowledging, and she picked up the heavy pot and carried it back into the kitchen. The door swung shut behind her. Cal watched it for a moment. Then he finished his coffee. He told himself he secured a room at the Duskwater Hotel because it was the most convenient lodging in town, and the commission would be keeping him in Duskwater until spring. Both of those things were true. He told himself it had nothing to do with the bread. He was not a man who lied to himself for very long. He took his meals in the dining room every day. He was not the loudest man there, or the most demanding, or the one most likely to tip generously and expect a fuss made over him. He was the one in the corner table who read survey maps while he ate and asked for his coffee refilled exactly once. The waitstaff learned quickly that he was low maintenance and forgot about him accordingly, which meant he had ample, uninterrupted time to watch. He watched Nora Voss the way a surveyor watches land methodically, without rushing to conclusions, noting what was actually there rather than what he expected to find. What he found was this. She worked from before dawn until well after dark. She ran her kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone who had thought through every movement in advance. She never raised her voice. When the delivery boy brought her the wrong cut of meat, she corrected it without drama and adjusted the evening's menu by noon. When the stovepipe in the kitchen started throwing sparks, a dangerous, urgent problem, she was the one who noticed, the one who told Mr. Aldrich, and the one who stood in the kitchen directing the repairman, while Aldrich stood in the dining room accepting the apologies of inconvenienced guests. She did not take her meals in the dining room. He never saw her sit down. He never saw anyone ask how she was doing, whether she was tired, whether she needed anything. The other men in the dining room did not see her. They saw the plate she carried, the basket she refilled, the pot she poured from. They looked past her the way you look past a lamp, grateful for the light, indifferent to the lamp itself. Cal noticed that she read. This surprised him. When the kitchen had a slow hour in the middle of the afternoon, she would sometimes come out through the back and sit on the rear step with a book in her lap. He had seen her from the window of the stairwell twice. Once it was something small and leather-bound. Once it appeared to be a seed catalog, which she studied with the focused attention most men gave to investment ledgers. He tried to speak to her, and it did not go smoothly. He was not a man for easy conversation. He dealt in measurements and coordinates, in things that were precisely one way and not another way. Small talk felt to him like a poorly made map, all suggestion, no accuracy. "The rosemary in the bread this morning," he said one evening, catching her near the sideboard. "Is that from a kitchen garden?" She looked at him with those steady brown eyes. "What's left of one?" she said. "The frost took most of it. What would you replant in the spring, if you had the choice?" A pause. A slight shift in her expression, not softening, exactly, but a reorientation, as if she had expected a different kind of question. "Thyme first, then sage. Rosemary again, if the winter's mild enough." She considered for a moment. "Lavender, if I had enough room. But Mr. Aldrich thinks herbs are a waste of garden space." "He's wrong," Cal said. She looked at him a moment longer. "Yes," she said, "he is." And she walked back into the kitchen. It was the longest conversation they had yet had. He thought about it for 3 days. He began to notice things that needed doing. Not in a calculated way or not entirely. He was, by profession and by temperament, a man who noticed when something was not as it should be, and when he had the means to fix it, it felt unnatural not to. The hinge on the kitchen's exterior door had been pulling loose from the frame for weeks. One morning, before the breakfast service, when the kitchen was still empty, he took 20 minutes with a screwdriver and a handful of longer screws from the hardware store on Main Street and set it right. He left no note. He said nothing. 2 days later, the bread at dinner was rosemary and thyme. He was fairly sure she hadn't had thyme that week. There was a section of the back path, between the kitchen door and the well, that flooded whenever the temperature rose above freezing and then turned to glass when it dropped again. He mentioned it to Aldrich twice. Aldrich said he'd get to it. He did not get to it. Cal spent a Saturday afternoon in late November laying down a bed of gravel he'd bought and hauled himself, sloping it gently away from the path so the water would drain. The work took 4 hours. Nobody asked him why he'd done it. The next morning, his coffee arrived before he asked for it, and it was the good coffee, the bag she kept on the high shelf, not the standard house blend. He understood. Some people spoke with words. Others spoke with actions, and Nora Voss was so thoroughly the latter that words sometimes seemed to cost her something, as if she had learned long ago that saying what she wanted clearly and directly led nowhere good, and so she had stopped. He recognized this because he was somewhat the same way. He had a surveyor's distrust of anything that couldn't be verified on the ground. The other guests at the hotel noticed him. Eventually, a cattle broker named Holt, who took his meals at the next table, started calling him the bread man, with the cheerful condescension of someone who thinks he's joking and is not. Cal ignored this. A widow named Mrs. Farnsworth, who occupied the corner room and ate every meal with the deliberate slowness of someone with nothing to rush home to, looked at him over her spectacles one evening and said, not unkindly, "She's a serious girl, young man. She doesn't waste attention on men who aren't worth it." "I'm aware," Cal said. "Good," said Mrs. Farnsworth, and returned to her mutton. The crisis came in the second week of December. Cal came down for supper and found Nora in the dining room rather than the kitchen, not serving, but standing at the far end of the room near the bar, her hands at her sides, speaking to Mr. Aldrich, in a tone that was very controlled and very quiet. Aldrich's face was red. His voice carried. "Not running a restaurant, Nora. I'm running a hotel. The food is adequate. It's always been adequate. And I don't see the need to spend more on— the butter is rancid," she said. Her voice did not rise, but it was very clear. "I have been telling you for a week. I won't serve rancid butter to guests." "Then leave it off the table," Aldrich said, his voice dropping into a dismissive register that was somehow worse than the shouting. "Simple enough. Nobody's complaining." "They're not complaining because they don't know it's rancid," Nora said. "They think the bread just isn't as good." Something flickered across her face when she said it, a wound so small and so quickly closed that he almost missed it. The bread not being as good. The one thing she had, her one claim in this place, being diminished without her fault. "I'll order fresh butter when the next supply wagon comes," Aldrich said with the finality of a man ending a conversation he'd never intended to have. "That's the 15th. You'll manage until then." He walked back behind the bar. Nora stood there for a moment. She did not look at anyone in the room. Then she turned and walked back into her kitchen. Cal sat at his table and ate his supper. The bread was still good, because of course it was. She had probably made it with the last of the decent butter, and when he finished, he went upstairs and sat on the edge of his bed for a long time with his hands on his knees, looking at the floor. She had said they'll think the bread just isn't as good, and she had said it with the particular steadiness of someone who had been absorbing small indignities for so long that they had become a kind of weather, something you endured rather than something you fought. He was done watching. He was up before 5 the next morning. He saddled his horse before full light and rode 6 miles east to the Harker farm, which supplied half the valley with dairy. He bought 2 pounds of fresh churned butter from Mrs. Harker, who was pleased enough by the early custom to wrap it carefully in oilcloth against the cold. He rode back to Duskwater and left the package on the kitchen's exterior windowsill before the kitchen fire was even lit, before Nora was even downstairs. He did not mention it. He went about his day. That evening, the bread was extraordinary. It was the best thing he had eaten since the first time, maybe better, because now he knew what it had cost her to make it well under circumstances that made everything harder. He ate 2 pieces slowly, the way you read a letter you want to keep. He found her the following morning as she was coming in from the well, carrying a bucket in each hand, her breath clouding in the cold air. He stepped forward and took both buckets from her. She let him, watching him with those careful eyes. "I need to say something," he said, "and I'm not going to say it well, so I'll ask you to hear me out before you respond." She considered him for a moment. "All right," she said. He set the buckets down on the kitchen step. "I am going to be in Duskwater until March," he said. "After that, I have a contract in Wyoming, and after that, the commission I'm working for is likely to send me north. There's a settlement near the Clark Fork River that needs a proper survey before they can file a township plat. It's a new place, very new." He paused. He was better with maps than speeches. "The settlement has a trading post and a bunkhouse and about 40 people. And none of them have decent food because there's no one there who knows how to cook. There's a building that was meant to be a boarding house. The woman who was going to run it went back east in September. The building is sound. It has a kitchen with a good iron range and a cold larder and a door that locks from the inside." Nora had gone very still. She was watching him the way she sometimes watched the fire in the stove, gauging heat, gauging safety. "What I'm offering is this," Cal continued. "A position running the boarding house kitchen at fair wages, with your own room and your own larder, and no one to tell you the herbs are a waste of garden space." He paused again. "I would be there, working, not underfoot." He stopped, because he was running out of the right kind of words, and he did not want to fill the silence with the wrong kind. Nora looked at him for a long, still moment. The cold air moved between them. Somewhere down the street, a horse stamped. The morning was just beginning to go gray at the edges. "I have a tin box," she said at last, her voice careful and quiet. "Seeds I've been saving. Herbs, mostly. Some vegetables. My mother gave me the first of them." She stopped. "I've been carrying them for 3 years. There's no garden here that's mine." Cal felt something shift in his chest. A loosening of something he hadn't known was tight. "There's half an acre behind the boarding house," he said, "south-facing. Good drainage." He looked at her steadily. "It would be yours." She looked down at the ground for a moment. He watched her think. He had learned enough about her by now to know that she did not make quick decisions and he should not push. She was tallying something, what she had here, against what she didn't have. What she was being offered against the risk of trusting a man she'd known for 6 weeks, what it meant to start over against what it meant to stay. When she looked up, there was something in her face that had not been there before. Not happiness, not quite, but the early, careful shape of it. "I would need to leave properly," she said. "Give Mr. Aldrich time to find someone else." 2 weeks is reasonable," Cal said. "I'll wait, and I'd need the tin box to travel safely." "The seeds can't freeze. I'll build a box for it," he said. "Insulated. It'll travel fine." She looked at him for another long moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved not a full smile, but the suggestion of one, quiet and real, like the rosemary note in the bread. "You surveyed all of that very quickly," she said. "The boarding house, the half-acre, the south-facing drainage." "I survey things," he said. "It's what I do." "I noticed," she said. And something in the way she said it told him she had been noticing him too, and that he had not been nearly as invisible as he'd assumed. She gave her notice to Aldrich that afternoon. Aldrich was irritated, then resigned. He had, in the way of people who take good things for granted, not considered the possibility that the good thing might leave. The 2 weeks passed. Cal built the insulated box seater, with a tight-fitting lid and a layer of wool batting inside, and left it on the kitchen step. He did not make a ceremony of it. He was not a man for ceremonies. Nora packed her few things with the efficiency of someone who had packed before. A trunk of clothes, her books, her kit of knives, and the tin box of seeds, which she placed inside the cedar box herself, carefully, the way you settle a sleeping child. On a cold Tuesday morning in late December, Cal loaded her trunk onto the back of the hired wagon. Mrs. Farnsworth stood in the doorway of the hotel, wrapped in her shawl, and watched them go without waving, which was her way of saying she approved. The road north was long. They talked, and this time the words came more easily, the way they do when two people have already said the important things in other languages and the spoken ones are just confirmation. She told him about Ohio, about the farm, about the brother who had inherited it, and the particular loneliness of being unwanted in a place that was supposed to be home. He told her about the years of surveying, the way you could walk across the same land 50 times and never be finished learning it. He told her about his own father's homestead, sold after his father died, and the specific grief of losing land you had worked with your hands. "What does it feel like?" she asked. "Standing in a place and knowing it's yours?" He thought about it. "Like finishing a map," he said. "Like knowing where all the edges are." She considered this. "I think for me it would feel like planting something," she said. "Putting something in the ground that you intend to come back to." The settlement at Clark Fork was smaller than she'd been led to expect, and raw. The buildings new enough that you could still smell the cut lumber, but the boarding house was sound, as promised. The kitchen range was cold, but operable. The cold larder was dry, and behind the building, south-facing, with good drainage exactly as described, was a half-acre of ground that nobody had done anything with yet. Nora stood at the kitchen door in the thin January light and looked at it for a long time. Cal stood a few steps behind her, watching her face. She turned around. "I want to start with thyme along the south wall," she said. "Rosemary in the corner by the post. The rest I'll plan out in February." "Tell me what you need and I'll get it," he said. She looked at him steadily. "You'll be in the field a great deal," she said. It was not a question. "I will," he said. "But I'll be here in the evenings, and I'll come back." She held his gaze. "I know you will," she said, simply and without drama, in the tone of someone stating a fact they have already verified. He did come back. He came back in the evenings, when the light was fading and the settlement was going quiet, and he would find her in the kitchen or on the step, and they would talk the way they had learned to talk, not quickly, not with a great deal of decoration, but thoroughly, the way you survey important ground. Spring came, slow and muddy and then suddenly bright. Nora's garden took shape along the south wall, tentative first, then, with increasing confidence, the green pushing through the dark soil in the precise places she had planned for it. She ran the boarding house with the same quiet competence she had brought to everything, and the 12 settlers who ate there every evening began to plan their days around her meals, the way you plan around reliable geography. "She's the best thing that's happened to this settlement," said a man named Porter one evening, leaning back from a supper of roasted chicken and herb bread that had made the whole table go briefly silent with appreciation. Cal looked up from his coffee. He was sitting at the end of the long table, as he always did when he was in camp, watching her move between the kitchen and the dining room with that particular economy of motion he had been watching for months and had not yet finished studying. "Yes," he said. "She is." She heard him. She was carrying an empty plate back to the kitchen, and she did not turn around, but her steps slowed for just a moment, and when she disappeared through the kitchen door, she was smiling. He found her on the step that evening after the last dish was washed, in the late May dusk. The garden was filling in now, the rosemary dark and fragrant against the post, the thyme spreading along the base of the south wall in the neat, determined way of things that intend to stay. He sat on the step below her, and for a while neither of them spoke. This was not unusual. They had long since made their peace with silence between them. "I've been asked to lead the survey of the northern section," he said at last. "It would take me away for about 6 weeks this summer." "I know," she said. "Porter mentioned it." "I'd rather not go," he said and stopped. She waited. He turned and looked up at her. The evening light was doing something particular to her face, catching in her eyes, which were warm and quiet, and watching him without any guard in them at all. "What I mean to say," he said, "is that I've been a surveyor long enough to know the difference between land that's worth coming back to and land that isn't. And I know what it means when a man is more interested in the coming back than the going." He stopped again. He pressed on. "Ada Nora, I would like to come back to you specifically. Not just the settlement. Not just the good food, though it is very good." The faintest crack of humor in his voice. "I mean, I would like to come back to you. If that is something you would want." Nora was quiet for a moment. The garden breathed around them. "Cal," she said, and her voice was dry and gentle and warm all at once. "I planted a second rosemary plant in March." He looked at her. "I know. I noticed. It's for the corner by the kitchen door," she said. "The one I knew I'd be cooking from for a long time." She paused. "I planted it in March." He understood exactly what she was saying. She had decided, or begun to decide, before he had said a single word. He took her hand. It was warm and rough from the work she loved, and it fit inside his the way a correct measurement fits inside a survey note, like it was always supposed to be exactly that. They were married in June, in the yard behind the boarding house, with the garden in full flower and every soul in the settlement standing in the long afternoon light. There was no preacher available, so the settlement's elected leader spoke the words, slowly and with great feeling, as if he had written them himself and was not entirely sure of the spelling. Porter stood beside Cal and wept with cheerful shamelessness. Mrs. Farnsworth, who had made the journey up from Duskwater specifically and without being asked, sat in a chair near the rosemary and said nothing throughout and smiled throughout, which was as close to a blessing as Cal figured the occasion needed. Nora wore a dress the color of new sage, which she had sewn herself in the evenings over the previous month. She carried nothing. Her hands were empty, open, ready. Years later, the settlement became a proper town, with a name on the postal map, and a church with a bell, and a school that Nora helped to found, and that her children attended alongside the children of every family she had fed to health and steadiness in the years of the settlements. Growing, the boarding house became an inn, and then a hotel, not grand but genuinely good, known throughout the region for its kitchen. The garden grew. It spread and deepened and changed with the seasons, and was never entirely the same from one year to the next, which was something Nora said she had intended from the beginning. There were always herbs along the south wall. There was always rosemary by the kitchen door. On an evening in late October, a long time into their life together, Cal came in from a week in the field to find Nora in the kitchen, the good smell of bread moving through the whole house. He sat at the kitchen table, his particular chair, the one that had become his chair through the logic of repeated use and no other agreement, and she put a plate in front of him without being asked. He picked up the bread. He broke it. The steam rose from it in the lamplight, carrying that familiar, particular scent herbs and warmth and care, and something wilder underneath, something that had traveled a long way from an Ohio farm and a tin box of seeds and a south-facing plot of frozen ground. He looked up at her. "Still the finest thing I've ever surveyed," he said. She sat down across from him. She always sat down now, had sat down for years, at the table that was hers in the house, that was hers in the life she had built from the ground up with careful hands. She rested her chin in her hand and looked at him with the warm, unguarded directness that he had spent years earning and never took for granted. "You always say that," she said. "I'm always right," he said. Outside, their eldest daughter was teaching her younger brother to identify the herbs by smell, holding out small bunches from the drying rack, with the serious authority of a child who considers this to be important knowledge. Through the window, Cal could hear the boy getting it wrong, and the girl correcting him with patient, precise certainty that was her mother entirely. Nora heard it too. A real smile moved across her face, quiet and whole. This is the thing about being seen, not the grand kind, not the kind that requires an audience, the kind that asks nothing more than one person paying close attention to another. It is a man who notices what herbs are missing from a garden. It is a woman who plants the second rosemary plant in March because she already knows. It is the particular, unhurried work of two people who have decided, without ceremony or announcement, that the other one is worth understanding completely. It is never the easy kind of love, and it is never the loud kind. It is the kind you build by hand, slowly, with the same care you give to things you intend to last. Sometimes the most life-changing thing one person can do for another is simply to pay attention. Not the dramatic, sweeping kind, but the quiet, daily kind. Notice what's missing from someone's garden. Notice when they haven't sat down to eat. Notice the small burden they carry without complaint. That quality of attention, offered steadily and without fanfare, is how trust is built, how people heal, and how ordinary lives become something genuinely beautiful. A small note for you: this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted with the hope of bringing you a moment of warmth and entertainment, and perhaps one small reminder that kindness, offered quietly, is never wasted.